Learning about trees has always been a passion for me. It's my business. But for you guys out there, whether it be for professional reasons or you just love trees, I appreciate your feedback. That was my old wall of used climbing belts. I'll talk about that in another video one of these days. But this video is about the tree work that I've been doing this week, and oftentimes I run into some very, to me, unusual things to see. The length of this branch and how much weight was on the end of it, I found very surprising. There was a structure underneath, so the fear of a failure was very real. It would cause a lot of damage. And I was pushing on the branch, and you can tell when you push on a branch from the end just how strained it is. If it has a good spring back, you know that there's not too much weight, but if it just droops and sags, you know something's going on. So up in the same tree, an adjacent live oak was rubbing a spot pretty bad, and it had pressure from below and pressure from above. So unfortunately, I didn't get this on camera when I cut that out of there, but I had a couple of interesting springbacks. Black walnut. This one has thousand canker disease. It's a disease complex native to the western United States and primarily attacks black walnut, Juglans nigra. This disease is the result of the combined activity of a fungus, Gliosmithia morbida, and the walnut twig beetle, Pidiopterus juglandis. Yeah, I read that from the web. Okay, true confessions, a very embarrassing situation for me. One of my guys, 40 years ago, made this cut, and he decided that he could go out on the limb about 20 feet, and he did not make an undercut. He figured it would rip off. Well, it didn't. It ripped all the way down the trunk, almost to the ground. I was so embarrassed by this. The client was an old man. He was an old farmer, and he just kind of shuffled it off, and I didn't get into any big trouble. But every time I look at this, I'm embarrassed. Same job, same location, also 40 years ago, we removed a plane tree, sycamore. It was a fairly large tree, and a resulting sprout came from the trunk and continued to grow. This sprout, this sucker, is 40 years old. It's growing off of the trunk, and it has some of its own roots, but it's growing over the structure. I don't know how safe it is. I don't feel very good about it. I think I'm going to recommend removing it. All right, here's an example of what the title is all about. Can pruning cause a failure? Here's an area where a long time ago a limb was cut off and it sprouted back with 5 new limbs. The resulting end weight, tip weight, was so excessive that this branch was ready to snap. It's a very, very long, gangly branch. People park underneath this tree. So I made the decision to take off a lot of the weight. I think I took off 3 of these end pieces, and that's what it looked like when I was all done. So it still looks presentable, but that's the brush that came off of just that one area of the tree. So it gives you a better idea of just how heavy it was. We're experiencing so many summer limb drop failures right now that I'm being very cautious. Not bad. So we got into some camphor trees yesterday. There was 3 of them, a lot of dead wood and a lot of discoloration. Cinnamomum camphora. And this one had a spot of mistletoe. And I honestly can't remember ever seeing mistletoe in a camphor tree. I see it often in ash trees and walnut trees, but not in camphors. And then while I was up there in the bucket, I spotted this. And I started looking at it, and it was a spider web, which isn't unusual, except this spider web went straight out across the street for about 50 feet and connected to another tree. I was amazed. Then I was up there, I started looking at the coloration on some of these trees, and this particular one had a serious decline in color. Now, it's really easy to look at something like this and come up with a conclusion and offer a solution. A lot of people would say, oh, that's a nitrogen deficiency. We got to fertilize the tree. Well, I don't think it's a nitrogen deficiency, and I'm not about to say that. But I know a lot of companies make a lot of extra money fertilizing because they see something like that. This is what the healthy leaves look like. And these are interesting trees because the roots are very prominent. Look at that burl. I read an article the other day about some thieves that were stealing maple burls from a park up in Oregon. I think 25 or more trees had been basically raped with chainsaws in the night. Now, I'm a woodworker and I love burl wood, but boy, that would be such a crime. Here's an area where there is some serious trunk decline going on. That looks like a structural weakness. It's not over a house. It's in kind of an open area. So if there was a failure, I can't imagine it being too catastrophic. But I always like to look all the way around the base of a tree when I see something going on. And you notice the roots of this tree are all up on the surface. This is in a complex. And you have to remember that in these apartment complexes or townhouse complexes, when they develop, they go in with bulldozers and scrapers and they wipe out all the good soil. They bring in a little bit of soil and then they plant. And because the roots have a hard time percolating down below that hard pan, they often are surface rooted. Now, there's a basket case tree. Look at that. The roots were dried out and cut. And yeah, this complex has all their trees inventoried. This one right here, it's not hurting anything, but it sure is ugly. I would probably recommend removal of it, but you know, they get emotional attachments to their trees out here, so we do the best we can. And adjacent to the property is the remnants of what this valley used to be like. There was orchards everywhere, and that's a piece of old orchard equipment. That's an old citrus orchard. I run into a lot of unusual situations, and people have different requirements and needs and wishes and hopes for their trees, and sometimes I feel it's very difficult to give a client an accurate evaluation as to just how safe a tree is. Obviously, this tree has problems. At the main crotch, there was enough rotted wood down there to fill a bucket full of compost, and that's all rotting wood. That's obviously a weakness. And as you can see, I put the knife in there quite a ways. So what that told me was it's much worse than I thought. So the very first thing I did was get a lot of weight off of there. But then I had to try to evaluate just how bad this weakness was. So I dug it out by hand as much as I could, and I ran a probe down there. And it went down about 24 inches. I'm sure it was further than that. But after I took a lot of weight off of it, I had to make a decision about a cable. They asked me to put a cable up here, and I was a little bit dubious about the idea of supporting this tree with a cable, because honestly, I think it should probably come out. The client asked me about that, and I just kind of shook my head, and I said, if you're going to keep this tree, you should, cut the heck out of it, pullard it, cut it way, way back. And this is what the tree looked like when I was all done. I opted for one cable in a spot that felt the best to me. But in all honesty, I don't feel really great about it. I saw this on the drive home, which really surprised me. Some people take their property line to the umpteenth degree, and clearly it was crowding them. But don't do that.